Lawyers of Reddit, what is the dumbest thing your client has done to ruin a case? Not an attorney, worked in a firm. Workers' compensation claim. Guy falls down at work and claims he injured many different body parts. Shoulder, knees, back. We tell him to stay off social media. No problem. He doesn't use social media. At trial, he tells the judge he used to be a spin class instructor, but since the accident, he cannot teach classes anymore. Welp, turns out, he continued to teach these classes after his injury. This was proved by the hours of surveillance the insurance company did, showing him teaching and vigorously riding in spin class. How did the insurance company know he was still an active instructor? The guy posted his full teaching schedule on his FB page. His potentially very lucrative claim was quickly changed to a fraud claim against him. We had a guy claim he dropped a pallet on his foot and broke it during work. Okay, he goes to the dock and gets a cast. 5 days later he calls in that he got the cast wet and had to cut it off. Gets a new one. 5 days later it was too tight and he cut it off again. I met him at the clinic to be the co-rep. Doc tells him to work into a shoe. We had a rent office space from us so we had him followed. Few days later, had video of him putting up a chain link fence, alone, in a pair of sandals. Of course we sent that to work comp. He skipped town before he was to meet with WC. Client added 9 years to a short sentence. He got like a year or two for being involved in a drag race that the other guy crashed and severely injured someone else. Then towards the end of his short prison term he tried to escape, got 9 more years for prison escape. He became friends with John Lennon's Kriller in NY prison, which was interesting. 9 years for prison escape? Did he cause serious injury to someone during the escape attempt? Probably was about to be out on a lengthy probation after the initial couple years, and then he ruined any chance of that and got the full sentence for the first crime. I have 2 stories that come to mind. 1. A colleague of mine was representing a arsonist MNY years ago that had allegedly set quite a large fire that burned some public land. Due to the $sign cost of the damage, it was a felony. During the state's case in chief, he began touching himself. Recess had to be called. Funnily enough, that helped him in punishment phase, since there was clearly a mental component there, but still, big oof, and I don't know if what had been shown up to that point would have gotten a guilty. Second was one of mine. Again, many years ago. I had gotten a guy a pretty great deal on a serious theft charge. Prior to it being entered, he ended up picked up by the sheriff's office for violating conditions of bond. How did he violate? The sheriff alleged that he used the banking information of the sheriff's office to pass fake checks. This meant that in the new charge, the sheriff's office was the victim. Needless to say, the deal vanished. Not an attorney, but one client of ours baffles me to this day. He had multiple cases, including aggravated battery and drug possession. At the insistence of dude's family, we moved heaven and earth getting him a bond, so that he could get out of jail and live with said family until the case was over. The whole process took weeks. Less than a day after getting out, he was caught stealing $16 worth of batteries from Target. Bond revoked. To be fair, the line between stupidity and compulsion is blurred with this one. Edit, for anyone who's curious, we immediately ordered a psych eval for him. He was found competent, but it also confirmed what he had: mental health issues. The bat charge ended up being dropped, and he took a plea for time served. I had an instructor who was a prosecutor. He called a witness who had seen the whole thing, and had an interest in seeing the defendant punished. Slam dunk case. She thought she was on TV. She overacted every word. Completely embellished the retelling of the events. Didn't lie, but she was the center of her version of events. He said you could see the faces of the jury members sour minute on minute. He lost the case. It was a credit card fraud case in the early part of my career. He actually wore the stolen clothes to court and a clerk at the defrauded store identified them in front of the jury. I felt like the guy in the commercial that asks want to be somewhere else. Not my client but the petitioner attorney's client. The man claimed workers' compensation and threw the kitchen sink at us, meaning he basically listed just over half of his body parts on the claim petition stating that he injured each one. He was full of shit and my firm knew it. Anyways, we were going to trial and the day before we ran one more social media search. This absolute ducking moron posted a video of him winning a breakdance competition that was only a few months after the alleged work incident. Never saw a quicker dismissal in my life. With the utmost certainty in his voice, he yelled at the arresting officer that it's not domestic violence, I'm on public property. You could tell from his face he really thought he had the cop over a barrel on this one, but not a lawyer, but I was in a courtroom watching injunctions, restraining orders, play out. One case the woman was there, but the man was in prison so he was calling in. After deciding on an agreement, the guy asked if he could make a statement. At the end of his statement, he said and tell the woman to go duck herself. He got an additional 6 months of prison. The guy asked to make another statement after getting a tongue lashing from the judge. And he did it again telling her to go duck herself. And got another 6 months. Imagine losing a year of your life because you couldn't shut up for 5 minutes. I was on a jury where the defendant showed up in court day one wearing the same exact outfit as the unknown suspect in the video of the crime. It took only a few seconds before the judge immediately called a stoppage. All lawyers went into the back with the judge and they came out like 7 minutes later as announced the defendant had taken the plea deal. Wild. Not me, but a colleague. A wealthy client's son got picked up for drug dealing at a local music festival. The client bailed him out, and then had his whole fancy law firm defend his son. The son shambled into the courtroom stoned off his ass, and loudly attempted to buy Drew Gus off the bailiff. There wasn't a lot the lawyers could do after that. He was charged with drug dealing. How can he be dealing when he doesn't even have any Drew Gus and is trying to score some off the bailiff? Clearly innocent. Had a domestic violence case. 4 months we went to preparatory hearings and gathering evidence, and got restraining orders. By the time the trial was finally happening, on the same morning of the hearing, the person I represented let me know she had gone on holidays with the defendant for a couple of weeks, and had grand old time. At that point, the opposing counsel approached me and told me he had lots of evidence of both the parties having a great time together. This of course doesn't mean abuse didn't happen in the past, but it really undermined our case, where we had little evidence other than some testimonials. At that point I had to explain to her how even beyond strict legal rules, the judge would potentially change her mind once she saw the claimant was out partying with the defendant, for whom a restraining order was requested. We settled and avoided the trial. Not a lawyer, but I am a former police officer and spent a lot of time in courtrooms. One guy was on trial for a DUI, and he wanted the judge to know that the cop who arrested him was just some punk kid. He insisted that he'd only had 2 bottles of wine and his lawyer keeps trying to get him to stop his stream of verbal diarrhea and he just keeps going. Eventually the judge says, I think you should take a moment to confer with your attorney, and the guy says, don't interrupt me, I'm not a child. Judge smiled and leaned back and said, by all means, please continue. Dude's attorney just looked like he was deflating. A foreign client had very limited command of the local language. We tried to prove that the client acted in good faith and was very cooperative, and also asked the client not to directly contact with the respondent. However, the client was very happy to write multiple letters to the respondent in a very broken local language, in which among others called the attorney of a respondent a cunning little whore, and the respondent was happy to submit it to the court. One of the first, and only, divorce cases I took as a solo was a man who said his wife had run away back to Nepal and abandoned him and their 7-year-old daughter in the States. He said he had no way to get in touch with her or find her and that she was likely with a new lover. So we effect service by publication, file everything at court, and case is rolling along uncontested. Until the wife shows up, gets her own lawyer, and shows that her husband knew where she was the whole time. He admits to me via email that he may have been a bit deceptive with me. I told him that if he was willing to be fully truthful with me going forward, we could work with wife's attorney to come up with an agreement, but that he would need to pay me more because now it's a messy contested divorce and his small retainer for uncontested is depleted. He did not do either of these things. I had zero faith he would not continue to lie. He gave me more reasons to see that he was continuing to lie to me, so after telling him I could not represent him anymore, I filed for a withdrawal of representation, a mandatory one based on fraud to the court. Show up to court for the motion hearing and he stands up and says he objects and doesn't want me to withdraw. Said I'm only trying to walk because of the money and then tries to hand over every communication we have had to the court. He printed out all of our emails. Wife's lawyer looks at me and, as client is trying to hand these over, informs him that they would get to see everything as well, so maybe that's not a great idea. Wife's lawyer was really great. Judge is dumbfounded. I tell him it's a mandatory withdrawal and if I'd give any additional info, I'm prejudicing my soon-to-be ex-client. Judge briefly tried to explain to client what that meant and allowed my motion. He shut up and I walked out. Client accused of punching another man in damp, knocking a tooth out. He said numerous times on the stand that he had arthritis and was not capable of closing his fist to form the punch as described by the victim. Partway through his cross-examination, the magistrate stopped him to state on the record that he had watched my client clench his fist numerous times since he made that statement. He was found guilty. I'm not a lawyer, this isn't my story. But, the lawyer who handled my business stuff and a legal dispute is a federal judge. Before he became a judge, he was a lawyer for divorces and civil stuff. A wealthy male client filed for divorce. There's a prenup. It's pretty ironclad. It discusses the distribution of wealth. The alimony, if any, is laid out at X amount, increasing yearly based on inflation. There's one major exception, and that is if you are caught cheating. Cheating here is defined by any sexual contact with a person before the divorce is final. You automatically get the worst terms of the prenup. In the woman's case, if she cheats, she gets zero alimony and a one-time payment of $100K. In the man's case, if he cheats, he loses the main family home, all cars that are not his daily driver, and 1/4 of his business. A buyout option is available, but doesn't matter to this story. Lawyer gets to court and meets with his client in a conference room. And client is beaming. He shakes the lawyer's hand and says, "Hey, Mike. I want you to meet Jasmine. I met her 2 months ago. She's amazing. We got engaged over the weekend in France and Mike shook her hand and slumped in the chair and said, so, we got a major problem. You are cheating on her wife with her. And legally, this is discovery I'm required to hand over to the other side. He's all, how the duck am I cheating? We're separated! Mike is all cheating is any sexual contact before divorce is final. It's in a prenup that you wrote on her own." The guy flipped his sheet. Ended up being so mad, he ditched court. Which gave him a default judgment. Meaning she gets everything she asked for. Plus, because of the cheating plus not showing up, the judge ordered that the transfer of money happen within 30 days. As part of the initial agreement between both parties. He's not there to contest it. So, Balaam. The guy ended up trying to sneak the company to the new woman via a trust. But, it's an illegal move. He also tried to hide the money with her by giving her $1.1 million in cash, a bank transfer, but the judge stopped that once Jeff found out and required the woman to repay the money since she was given notice also. He fought 4 years. And ended up losing money, time, energy, his business, house, 6-7 cars, and his new wife. Now, cause I know his daughter from work, he's a retired angry man living in rural New Mexico. He can't afford to golf more than once a month. And he posts about how women are scum. Next morning edit, I certainly didn't expect this to blow up. Type for the positive DMs and replies. I'll try to reply if I see any questions in the thread to clarify stuff. Not a lawyer, but a forensic professional. And this wasn't dumb. The poor client couldn't help himself. Like Ron White said, he had the right to remain silent, but not the ability. Involuntary commitment hearing of a very manic and psychotic man who was hospitalized after trying to break into his mom's house by pounding on the door with his .357 Magnum. After going into diagnosis and mental illness, etc., at length, the prosecutor rested his case having literally forgot to ask the doctor if this man met criteria to be committed. The defense attorney, with a surprised smile, was about to ask the judge to dismiss the case. Basically, he had won, when his client hauled on his sleeve and they had a heated whispered conversation. The attorney informed the judge that his client was demanding to testify, against his advice. After cautioning him that his testimony was not required, the poor man took the stand and launched into a rambling angry rant about a myriad of disconnected delusional thoughts until stopped by the judge. His last sentence was, "Oh, and your honor, make them give me my gun back." He was committed. Client charged with DUI. Forced by police to give a urine sample on the side of a very busy interstate highway. Any sympathy the jury may have had for the defendant was lost, however, when he fell asleep during the playing of the video of the traffic stop. He had been out all night partying the night before trial. He was found guilty. Then he lied to the judge about what would be in his system during a drug test and his sentence was doubled. I was defending a client who was accused of trademark infringement. Thought he knew better than the IP attorney assigned to his case, me, and so went on his company's website to defend himself by basically confessing to what he did and claiming it wasn't against the law and the trademark owner was a woke baby who needed to either learn the law or get back in the kitchen and make her husband a sandwich. I wish I could say I was joking. I was one email away from negotiating a settlement that would have allowed the continued use of the complainant's mark with limited restrictions and a very nominal fee. Little to say, she saw his website, told us to go duck ourselves, and dragged it before a judge. My client lost big. His lack of self-control cost him thousands of dollars. I am a lawyer. I was cross-examining a slip and fall plaintiff on the stand in trial after like 2 years of litigation. We were going over some pictures he took when he let slip that the picture of the two signs was missing. I grilled him on what he meant until the judge chastised me for trying to conduct discovery during trial, which is supposedly not allowed. He had clearly concealed evidence though. We took a break for the day, and the next day he came back with the photo in question, which showed that he had walked squarely between two wet floor signs to go down the Kroger aisle that he immediately slipped and fell in. He did not recover any money in that one, despite the horrific defense venue. The judge who jumped all over me for exploring obvious evidence tampering was later appointed to the federal bench here in Atlanta. I was called for jury duty and was sitting in the courtroom watching the other potential jurors get questioned by the attorneys, just waiting for my possible turn to be questioned. One of the charges was aggravated assault. The defense asked one juror, who was a professional videographer, if her career made her more or less likely to put stock in video footage. To me, this was a hint, but not admission, that video footage would be a big part of the case. Before the juror could even answer, the defendant yelled from his table I had a mask on. You can't even see my face. The entire room went silent for about 5 seconds before the defense attorney regained his composure and asked the judge to dismiss the jury pool. The judge dismissed us back to the holding room. 5 minutes later, one of the clerks of the court came in and told us, even the already selected jurors, that the trial was being rescheduled and we were all dismissed. Commit robbery in order to hire an expensive attorney with minimal experience in criminal law rather than accept a seasoned public defender. Not my client, but I watched someone admit in open court to solicitation of prostitution during allocution. This was for statutory rape, which has a mandatory minimum sentence in my state. Judge was already going to give him the minimum, so there was literally nothing he could say that was going to make this go any better than it already was at that moment. But the defendant elected to speak as his attorney died slowly at the table. Went into a whole speech about how this charge was unfair and it was going to ruin his life and business. Pretty usual. But then he went on to say that he usually checks the ages of his hookers and that this time he didn't, and of course she was underage, and now here he is. Judge asked him to repeat it, and he said the exact same thing while defense counsel just hung his head down. This defendant was a character, had a lot of other eccentric habits and history that I heard about later. The judge was having a pretty good day, so he kept the sentence to the mandatory minimum, and I don't think the prosecutor's office took up the additional charge, but it was still fun to watch someone just absolutely talk themselves into a much worse situation for no reason but ego. Also, the number of people who show up to court for drug cases wearing WIDA/420 shirts is ducking incredible. And the kids who used to steal TomToms and other GPS units out of cars and then give a sob story about wanting to go to law school but these charges will ruin that chance became a running joke at the courthouse. I'm not a lawyer, but the local news ran a clip over and over from a murder trial where the defendant took the stand against their lawyer's advice. The defense was claiming self-defense. As the prosecution read transcripts from damning jail phone calls, the guy on trial, not his lawyer, called for an objection. It threw everyone for a loop. The judge asked him why he called for an objection. Dude was honest and said, I didn't know they'd actually listen to my calls. A recess was granted and dude took a plea deal when court resumed. Oh, I can't believe I'm late to this party. I started at a new law firm that was in the middle of a long false advertising litigation. Our client, defendant, maintained that their advertising claims were supported by a scientific report written years before that now no one could find. The scientist who'd run the tests said he remembered doing them but could not remember the results. The case progresses to trial, and at the close of plaintiff's evidence, my client's CFO bursts into the federal courtroom holding, I shit you not, a copy of the report that he had found in the back of some cabinet he was cleaning out for God know what reason. Pandemonium. Plaintiff calls for mistrial, judges banging his gavel, parties are yelling at each other across the aisle. My boss is objecting into thin air and no one is listening to anyone. The report supported literally nothing in the advertising. Great evidence for plaintiff's case, confirmed everything they claimed in the complaint. We got dragged for like $10 millimeters in losses. I left the firm shortly after, in part BC I was convinced that my boss and the CEO had burned what they thought was every last copy, and I still think the CFO kept one and did this on purpose. BC have beefed with the CEO. My mother was in court as a witness, in a case of criminal harassment between two of our neighbors. We basically knew that the case was ridiculous and a sham. The accused neighbor was totally innocent and was being falsely accused by the local troublemakers, who kept on provoking him and who then wanted to be able to sue him for easy money. Anyway, by pure coincidence, the defendant was secular Jewish, just like my parents. It's literally just a coincidence. The two troublemaker neighbors, who were also there, were very angry to see my mother in the court. One of them then stood up in the middle of everything and yelled some crap about how my mother is a Jew and only there because the defendant is a Jew, and Jews apparently always stick to help each other. The judge immediately ripped him to shreds and threw the case out. A friend was doing the workman's comp as well as suing the company for a few million. Could not bend over, raise his arms, plus everything he could think of. Taking the stand, using a cane. Lawyer asked him to read the highlighted parts from the local paper. A week before he had won a martial arts tournament. Can you explain that? Next 15 minutes he explained each kick, punch etc. with a big smile. I rest my case. Jury foreman asked the judge if they had to leave the room or could they just announce the verdict. I am a lawyer. I could write a book about this. Most dumb things happen when I am out of office or in trial and can't correct their behavior. Most common. Lying about easily verifiable, small things on the stand. Ruins credibility completely. We know you didn't pick your child up every single time from daycare because the daycare has a log and your mom signed the kid out 50% of the time. We know you filed multiple restraining orders on your spouse because it is electronic public record. Second most common. Changing their story on the stand. I prepared for facts to be the way you told me. I can't prepare for something I don't know about. Third most common. Completely ignoring advice. I told you that you couldn't take that $150K out of the bank account without repercussions. Incoming contempt. Order to sell the marital home. Home is actively for sale with a realtor. Client puts padlock on house so no one can access it or sell it. Here comes contempt. After 5 years I finally got a client custody of the kids. When the client went to pick up the kids, client brought a known violent felon, a loaded gun, and got in a physical fight with the guardian of the child. Emergency petition filed, children removed from her care. Had them for less than a week. Had the audacity to call me a bad attorney in front of the judge because the kids were removed. Judge laughed and informed the client I had won the case for her until her own actions caused this reversal. Allowed me to withdrawal on the spot. Not going to badmouth my former clients, even ones who might deserve it. But my opposing counsel's client. Suing a debt collector for freezing my client's bank account without first obtaining a judgment against her. Big no-no here in New York. This guy has been in the industry since before I was born, so I know it was not an accident, and suspected that there was some reason he could not sue and that was why he did it. But I thought there was no way we would be able to prove that we would settle out relatively cheap because there was no way we could prove it was anything more than negligence. This doofus produces the records for the underlying debt. One of them looks very clearly digitally altered, so I subpoena the creditor. Sure enough, he changed the date of default to try to hide that the debt was time barred, as in that he could not file a lawsuit about it. That certainly would not have been good for him, but he still could have argued that it was not enough to prove intent. However, nothing quite infers intent like trying to do a cover-up, and his poor attorney did not check the discovery carefully enough and totally missed it and had to withdraw from the case because he just accidentally suborned perjury. Was great for me and my client. Moral of the story: if you do something bad and get caught, trying to lie and cover it up will often get you in way more trouble. Not my client, but a plaintiff brought a personal injury suit claiming that the defendant hit him with her car when he was at a crosswalk. The defendant claimed he threw himself on her car when she was at a stoplight. In the middle of trial, a juror reported to the judge and the attorneys that he couldn't be impartial any longer because he saw the plaintiff throw himself on another car at the same intersection while the court was on a lunch break. I used to be a clerk at a law office. One of the attorneys was representing a man who was the trustee for his deceased mother's trust. Client claimed that his siblings were upset and suing him because he'd spent a lot of trust money on their mother's end-of-life care, and they were only claiming he'd mismanaged her funds because they were mad there wasn't a ton of money left to divide between them. At first glance, it did seem above board. The bank account had a ton of charges for care services, grocery stores, pharmacies, and funeral services. She'd been really sick, so caring for her cost a lot. Maybe they were just mad about the money being gone. Then the attorney asked me to go through one of the account statements. He needed to find a specific charge, but this was a printout from the bank, so not a searchable PDF. I'm sitting there going through dozens of pages for months of charges, and I noticed a recurring payment that didn't fit the care needs. I asked the attorney, did client's mom have a computer? He said no, she was elderly and almost blind. She didn't have anything technical except a TV and a landline. I showed him the subscription payment, and he said, what's Zoosk? Answer, it's a dating site. Turns out, client, who was married, was cheating on his wife and hiding the dating app subscription by charging it to his mother's account. That, in turn, made every other charge suspect, because were those grocery store payments for mom's food, or was he getting flowers for his woman on the side? Was the department store charge for mom's pajamas, or did he get someone's secret some sexy lingerie? I left the firm before the case resolved, but when I left, it didn't look good for client. Also before I left, his wife filed to divorce him. Luckily, we had a good divorce attorney, too, so he didn't have to go looking. Not a lawyer, but was working hand in hand with our company legal team. Guy working at my company claimed to fall off a ladder and seriously injuring his back while working alone, which is against company policy, with nobody else around, and doing a task that he wasn't supposed to be doing. Regardless, we had to take these claims seriously. Do all the paperwork. He gets sent to doctors and specialists, blah blah. We end up having to put him on light duties. Guy was working in the office just doing paperwork and parts ordering, working part-time but still collecting full paychecks. This goes on for a few months. Guy claims he's not getting better, and now has more complaints about the way he's being treated at the office. Claims he's being bullied at the office. Claims the chairs we had hurt his back more. Just saying a bunch of BS. Still claiming his back injury is very severe. He can't sleep properly, has troubles using the bathroom, and how this injury completely changed his life. This type of injuries can really screw your company and keep you from getting in certain projects. Well, middle of summer, I'm at a softball tournament with some friends. Guess who's playing? This guy. I watched him swing a bat multiple times, sprint to run bases and diving around to catch gonads or slide. I got a couple videos, called our legal team, let them know our findings. Sent the videos to them. And well, case was closed very shortly after that. Truly couldn't believe how cheaty and also how ducking stupid some people could be. Regardless if he truly was injured or not, you can't tell doctors you can't sleep properly because of back pain, then be swinging a baseball bat the very next weekend. Not a lawyer, but I was in a jury, and on the first day of trial after jury selection, during a lunch break, a random friend of the defendant came up to us saying all sorts of nonsense about how defendant was framed and to look up specific statutes citing the law. This was for a serious drug trafficking and violence case. We all reported what happened to the bailiff so we could be properly thrown off the jury. He said just sit tight, it probably won't matter. The case was settled by the time we came back to court, and the judge threw out the settlement offer, saying he, the judge, didn't appreciate the defendant wasting everyone's time. Wild stuff. Horrible friends, horrible lawyers on the defense, and I assume the defendant was also equally horrible for simply associating with these people, and also for the crime he admitted to and is still serving time for. I was representing a woman in an eviction where her husband had signed the house over to his girlfriend and his girlfriend was trying to evict the wife. Husband was in jail and wife had a restraining order against him. Girlfriend shows up to court drunk. Judge stops the hearing, orders a breathalyzer, and when she fails, throws her in jail for contempt of court. Opposing counsel tried to tell me she was self-medicating after falling in a hole in the backyard. My lawyer husband had a case where he basically fired the client. It was a civil case. The guy was in the right. All he had to do was turn up and testify. He was a no-show. Turned out the idiot got drunk, had a fight with his daughter-in-law, slugged her, and she had him thrown in jail. No one wanted to bail the guy out. My husband said he didn't want to represent somebody who would do that, and sent him to another law firm. Not an attorney, but I had a woman I arrested ask for a probable cause hearing. The charge was for escape. She'd cut off her GPS anklet and ran, and PC hearings for these sorts of things were very uncommon. Normally, only new public defenders use them, outside of a couple of other defense strategies for more serious offenses. Point being, there wasn't a whole lot of reason for having the hearing. She cut the anklet off. We had evidence of that, due to the anklet having been recovered, lol. Anyway, not only did she want the PC hearing, she demanded to testify. Her public defender, a newish one at the time, strongly recommended against it. He went and got another PD, who had a good rapport with this woman. Obviously, she was very familiar with our criminal court, who again recommended that she not testify. No power girl wanted her time on the stand. So, the hearing goes forward. Before it started, even the judge strongly recommended the defendant not go through with the hearing. Well, she did. Her testimony was that she'd been taken against her will by her boyfriend and that her made her cut off the anklet, blah, blah. I was called up as a witness, provided screenshots of the defendant's FB account, where she was shown with her boyfriend smiling happily, enjoying time with him and her daughter, etc. All dates time-stamped, of course. Obviously, probable cause was found by the judge that a crime had been committed and the case was sent to the grand jury for indictment. But, actually having a judge tell the defendant that testifying was a bad idea was a first for me. I'm a lawyer and a woman showed up in the office claiming the bank was about to take her house because she was more than 6 months late in her mortgage. There is this thing here: if you are poor and can prove it with your paycheck, you sign some papers and the judge declares your exception to pay justice fees and the other part lawyers in case you lose the case. So this woman earned a little bit more than minimum wage and had 4 small kids to support without a husband. Their house was a 2-bedroom with garbage everywhere, and everything broken inside. A real mess and a terrible environment for the kids. But she refused to sign the papers declaring the family's poverty status because, in her words, I'm not poor and even if I was, I have pride and I'd never assume that. I'll raise this money. Didn't sign my office's representation papers too, because she would look for a second opinion. Then she was gone. After 3 or 4 months she came back without appointment and with the money for justice fees. But it was after the deadline the judge stipulated and she had already lost the house.